very much for that, Corin. It's 10 minutes past 7, breakfast on a Tuesday morning. Great to have you with us. The scrapping of Auckland's regional fuel tax has sparked outrage from many motorists outside of our biggest city. They're upset at having to fork out to improve Auckland's transport system through a nationwide road tax. But is it the right way for the country to go? Here with his view is Cameron Pitchers from the Campaign for Better Transport. Cameron, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Is it the right way to go?
Well, I can understand outrage, particularly from the South Island, when you see that most of the extra $1 billion in road funding is actually going to be spent in the North Island. But if you go back to 2000, since about 2000, if you look at the figures, Auckland's actually been paying its way. But with this sort of thing, perception is reality, I think. If
you go back even further than that, though, isn't it true that Aucklanders paid a huge amount for roads in the South Island?
Possibly. I've seen all sorts of figures bandied about, but as I say, I think perception's everything, and certainly it's going to tilt the playing field back in favour, at least to the people in the South Island, to their point of view.
Yeah. Does it make sense, though, to say, is there a fair argument to say that if Auckland is the engine house of the economy, then it benefits everyone that it functions properly?
Yeah, well, I think you could say that, and believe it or not, Aucklanders do travel outside of Auckland, and they travel all around the country.
And, of course, products are travelling in and out of Auckland to every part of the country every day.
Yeah, I think it's valid to say that. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about this government's focus on roading, because we had the previous regime were moving the transport focus away, albeit in a small way, away from roading to other forms of transport, arguably more environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
This government clearly has stated the majority of New Zealanders are travelling in vehicles on roads. That's where we'll focus. Is that a good focus?
Well, the way they described it, they said 84% of people drive to work, and to me that's not a realistic target for particularly Auckland, where it's actually only 60 to 70% of the people drive, and in certain new areas of Auckland they're going for a target of just 30% of the people wanting to drive. So in Auckland we've got 900,000 cars, and we're about to go through the million mark. It just doesn't make sense for us to continually widen roads and
it's interesting because you said then that there are cities that have targets to get it down to 30%. It almost seemed to me like this is a government without a target. This is a government saying, right, this is what people want to do, we'll cater for that.
Yeah, that's right, and it's back to the old predict and provide. You try and predict how many cars are going to be flooding onto our roads, and you try and desperately keep building roads to try and keep pace with that. But obviously, we think electrification of the rail network's the way to go, and with this announcement, it actually creates for Auckland a $200 million shortfall in a lot of what we're wanting, things like integrated ticketing.
Is that peanuts, though, at the end of the day? I mean, we're talking a lot of money.
Well, you look at the roading budget, it's $2.5 billion they're spending, and on top of this, we're getting an extra $1 billion being spent over the next 3 years. So it is pretty... having said that, the National Party has said they're committed to electrification. They're just going to fund it outright from Crown funding.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because they've destabilised the funding for it just a weeny bit.
They have.
But at the same time, they've shored the project up. I mean, there's probably more certainty that it's going to go ahead now than there's been for a long time.
Yeah, but there's other public transport aspects that aren't. So integrated ticketing is a very big one for Auckland. It means having the same ticket for buses, trains and ferries. Now, Nikki Kay is the Auckland Central MP for that, and she's said she's going to support it. But what's happening now is the Auckland Regional Council is going to have to reapply to the National Land Transport Fund for funds for these projects. And as we saw in a news article, the Newmarket railway station's half built, so how are we going to fund the rest of that? And I'm not sure I agree with the whole premise that the regional fuel tax was going to be grossly inefficient, because surely by now, with 3 months to go, most of the hard work's been done. So
well,
like
you might assume that. That may not be true. Are the Greens right to say that this is a step backwards?
Well, when you look at what other countries are doing, I mean, the inherent assumption that widening roads is good for the economy, I think it's questionable, because at the moment...
Well, speeding up traffic is good for the economy. That much is true, isn't it?
Yeah, but is it as good as, say, building a geothermal power plant or investing more in research and development? I mean, we haven't seen... There's very little detail to these announcements. It's all pretty much statements of fact, and we're supposed to all go along and believe in it.
To a degree, though, it's statements of fact within a differing ideology, isn't it? The Greens are saying we're taking a step back, we're out of pace with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It does seem on the surface that we are out of pace with the way many countries are going with regard to...
Well, certainly, I mean, even the United States, they announced, I think it's $8 to $10 billion in funding for their rail network, which in United States terms probably peanuts as well. But even with the recession on, what we're doing is we're spending about 6.4% more importing oil at the moment than we were to the 3 months to January last year. So I think it's look out for increasing oil prices in the future. We need to be insulating ourselves from that, not making ourselves more
because we have
reliant.
forgotten a little bit about that since the price started falling.
It's $7.5 billion a year we're spending on oil.
Just finally, Cameron, is it a good idea that the government own the trains, do you think?
Well, again, I'd like to see a bit more detail on that. Currently in the Auckland region, the ARC owns the trains. We'd like to see what plans they've got for Kiwi Rail in terms of what kind of carriages they're going to be buying and so on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of boxes left to tick, isn't there?
That's right.
All right, Cameron, thank you very much for joining us. That's Cameron Pitcher's campaign for better transport. It's a complicated it's a thorny old fish, your transport.
Very, very complicated issue, and we're going to assess the political fallout from the transport plan next, and we'll look at whether we should target migrant workers first.